Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the 16-Bit Thief podcast. I am your host, Jake Melvin. Now I know it's been a while since my last episode, but I always keep well in my promise. I also want to apologize if this episode does not sound as well produced as the other episodes. I just bought a new computer and I'm kind of having to record this episode under the gun. Oh well, in any case, enough stalling. 1989 was a red-letter year for video games, with many critically acclaimed titles being released. Mother 1, Castlevania 3, SimCity, Final Fight, Hard Drivin', the list goes on and on. But one game by Capcom stood out in particular, and it was Strider. A side-scrolling hack-and-slash, you controlled Strider Hiryu on his journey throughout a dystopian future to destroy the evil Grandmaster, the ruler of the world. You would venture throughout the Amazon, Kazakhstan, Siberia, and even a flying battleship, all presented with multilingual cutscenes in Japanese, Mandarin, and English. The project was done in conjunction with manga studio Motokikaku, and the plot of the manga was later adapted for the NES version. Strider would later go on to become one of Capcom's most famous characters, ironically one that they themselves didn't even create. The director, Koichi Yotsui, left Capcom afterwards and went to Mitchell Corporation and created the delightfully weird and just as frenetic Osmond. I reached out to Yotsui and asked him some questions about his philosophy and his work ethic. Let's go on and see what he has to say. Question number 1. Osmond is the spiritual successor to Strider Hiryu in many ways, but most strikingly, the game has a more Middle Eastern feel adverse to Strider's Russian-centric motive. What was the decision behind that? This question comes in 3 parts. 1. Yotsui was a fan of the adventure novels that many British and American authors wrote. He found their expeditions to be innocent and immersive. 2. He found the landscapes that people aren't used to seeing in everyday life in the background of an adventure game to be much more exciting. After World War II, many of the pictures left behind in Japan showed more American structures and lifestyles. There was very little representation of European regimes in their layouts. It seemed unfair to not give them their fair viewing. So therefore, Yotsui decided to use the Russian landscape for Strider. Likewise, many Japanese authors do not use Middle Eastern aesthetics due to lack of knowledge surrounding them in Japan. Therefore, he chose the landscape of the Middle East in Cannon Dancer. It was a type of world that he was not used to seeing. Being an adventure game, he wanted to show how much of a diverse world it really is. Question number 2. Osmond used the Data East 156-based CPU hardware. Why did Mitchell choose to use this PCB? Ryozaki, the former president of Mitchell, was on good terms with the president of Data East. I guess it was a tit-for-tat situation. Question number 3. I have heard rumors that ex-Capcom staff worked on Osmond. Was this true? Yotsui does confirm that this is true, but the only staff member from Strider to work on Osmond was himself. Mitchell over the years has had a lot of job hoppers from Capcom, mostly contract workers, but the only main member of Osmond was Yotsui himself. Question number 4. Were there ever plans for a sequel or even a home port of Osmond? He has had plans several times to make one, but unfortunately it has fallen through every single time. I did some research on this one actually. Mitchell Corporation ceased research and development sometime in 2012, and not too long after, the president, Ryozaki, said that the licenses of their games were available to sell for whoever wanted to purchase them. Games such as Charlie Ninja, the Buster Brothers games, Osmond of course, were all available. But I do not know if anything ever came of this, and I don't know if Ozaki still has them available for purchase, sadly. Question number 5. Kirin is a pretty cool character and stands out very well against other side-scrolling protagonists. What influences did you take on designing him and his unique martial art? Yotsui is actually a black belt of karate, so he followed his instinct in making the character. Well, write what you know, I guess. Question number 6. Your first video game that I recall you working on was Capcom's 1986 The Speed Rumbler. What video game influenced you the most to enter the industry? At the time, Yotsui was actually working for film at a university. He wasn't a fan of video games, but he saw that Capcom was making video games and was interested. He found that game making was much more fascinating than movie making, and the rest is history. Question number 7. The Japanese version of Strider had Strider grunt when he used Cypher. I know that the late Shiozawa Kanito voiced Hiryu in the PC Engine port, but who did the grunts for him in the original CPS-1 version? It was just a friend of a staff member at Capcom, just somebody from the general public. Likewise, the voice actor for Kirin in Osmond was Masayo Fuji. However, he was just a friend of Ryozaki and somebody from the general public as well. Question number 9. One of the most memorable things about Strider is the attract mode, boasting that nobody has ever cleared the Siberian wilderness or Amazonian jungle. It remains that way even after somebody has beaten them in the game's SRAM. What was the reason for putting that in the attract mode? Yotsui wanted to invite people to an untrodden mountain because it's an adventure story. He wanted them to take the plunge and try something completely different and new. Question number 10. I try to refrain from asking questions about sequels made without the original creator's involvement because it just seems rude. But what did you think of 1999's Strider 2 as well as the 2014 reboot of Strider? Yotsui says that he thinks they are wonderful games and gave his blessings to the team behind Strider 2 as well as the 2014 reboot. But, concerning the 2014 reboot, he contacted director Tony Barnes and actually keeps in contact with him via Facebook because he very much enjoys what he has done with the game. Question number 11. Do you still work with fellow Mitchell coworkers like President Roy Ozaki, or Charlie Ninja director Koichi Nida, or any of the other anonymous developers who worked on other Mitchell titles? According to Yotsui, Nida returned to Shikoku not too long after leaving Mitchell. Roy lives on the west side of the Keio, as does Yotsui. Sometimes they get together and drink. It's good to know that some people still keep in contact years later. And the 12th and final question I have to ask, what is your philosophy on designing video games? What goes into making the games you love the most? Yotsui says that games aren't shown on the surface of the screen. What shows in the game is actually in the player's fingertip and the head. It's how immersed you get in within the game. Well, that about does it for me. Again, I want to thank Koichi Yotsui for answering some questions I've always wanted to know about the games he's worked on. Also, I can only apologize for the audio levels in this episode. And don't worry, next time they'll be much better. Be sure to check in next time for when I interview Toaplan producer Tatsuya Uemura. Probably be the biggest episode yet. Until next time, this is the 16-Bit Thief, signing out.